And really, one of the components of human rights around the world is democracy. We tend to take it for granted these days. Maybe not so much these days, but maybe 5 years ago. And it's now something that we're talking very seriously about having to defend. We're seeing authoritarian regimes around the world take place. We're seeing major issues now, and we're seeing some under threat, frankly, if we're looking at some of the politics and some of the protests in Iran over the last 24 hours. And there's a reason why democracies are so important. Just as a quick reminder, for those of you who may not be familiar, it's all about accountability and the rule of law. If we don't have a democracy where leaders are accountable to the populace, and then the rule of law can't be properly enforced, people like you and I no longer have fundamental human rights. We lose those very quickly under authoritarian regimes, whether it's the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, all the other amendments, those disappear quickly. And so what we want to do today is talk to some folks who take this very seriously. This is literally their full-time job. And they have been able to put together a fund, literally called the Democracy Fund. And they are focusing on medical technologies in some cases and other things as well to help stabilize free market democracies. Again, the word free market should be important to everybody on this session as well. And that's an important element, certainly, with all the work that we're doing around digital health and human rights. And so along those lines, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Julie Kane and Richard Rikoski to talk to us a little bit about what they're doing at the Democracy Fund and its importance today in really helping to stabilize democracies and ensure healthcare human rights around the world. So let's start with quick 1 minute introductions for each of you. Julie, you go first, and then we'll hand it off to you, Rick, as well.
Thank you, Stan, and thank you for that great introduction. It's an honor to be here today. Yes, I'm the CEO of Democracy Investments. I have a 20-year background in financial services at companies like Wells Fargo and Charles Schwab. But I began my career as a naval aviator. I flew helicopters in the Philippines and brought medical supplies to the villagers who were the victims of the Mount Pinatubo eruption. So very early in my career, I witnessed the importance of healthcare in less developed markets. And I'm excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Rick.
I'm Rick Rikoski. I'm the chief economist for Democracy Investments. Essentially, I come up with economic strategies and incentives to promote democracy, to promote democratic economies, and to limit the growth of authoritarians. And to the extent that this is correlated and in fact has a causal relationship with public health, we're promoting public health.
Can't agree with you much more. Love the introductions, and again, very impressive backgrounds from you both. Just incredible to see how these intersections of your backgrounds come to where we are today with not only building this fund and developing it, but now also taking it forward and doing the good work that you're doing. And let's talk a little bit about democracy investments and what you do. Julie, again, if you could kick us off in that direction, and then Rick, if you could chime in after Julie, that would be great.
Yeah, so our core strategy is to create incentives to improve democracy, which has the parallel effect of bringing good public health outcomes. We do this by leveraging the Economist Democracy Index. We combine the Economist Index country scores with traditional stock index. So we're very neutrally reweighting towards democracies and away from authoritarian states. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Economist Democracy Index, they've been publishing these country scores since 2006 using 60 different indicators, which weigh heavily towards human rights and civil liberties. So we've partnered with them to use their index for financial products globally. And we have a product that tracks that index. So investors can feel good getting international exposure in a very passive, simple way without fueling the growth of authoritarian states, but instead shifting capital towards democracies to pump up their economies.
That's fantastic. And Richard, did you want to add anything to that as well?
Well, I think that it's important to understand the basic logic of a CEO with a publicly traded company. If you've got a very high price to earnings ratio, meaning that your company's valuation is extraordinarily high, you can cheaply sell shares, buy equipment, buy cheap profits. You give your shareholders a good return, but your company is growing. If you've got a very low PE ratio, you can just buy back shares of your own stock on the market and you get good shareholder returns. If you apply that at the country level and you think about what happens with countries with high PE ratios, they see outsized economic growth. Countries with low PE ratios do not. So we want the democracies to have high PE ratios so they outgrow the authoritarians. That's central to our strategy.
It's fantastic. And really, in this day and age, when we think about a free market, it's also very democratic in a lot of ways. When you have a publicly traded company, you have shareholders. Ultimately, the board and the executives are ultimately accountable to those shareholders. So it's a very nice corollary that you're talking about there. And Richard, while we're talking, why don't you talk to us a little bit about disinformation in different worlds and different regions in our world, and how that's impacting public health, and certainly over the last few years how it's impacting democracies.
Well, I think the first thing that you have to recognize is that disinformation has become a central part of great power competition. Facebook, to date, has deleted 25 billion fake accounts. It's more than 3 times the world's population. They're deleting more than 2 billion fake accounts per quarter. And don't shoot the messenger. They're telling us this. They're giving us the data. Twitter has a similar problem. TikTok is its own very complicated situation since it's so tightly connected to China. And often what they're trying to do is to drive wedges between different parts of our populations. Vladimir Putin has come out and said that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. And some of them have interpreted this as him saying he wants to reassemble the Soviet Union. But another way to look at it is he thinks that the breakup of the democracies, their alliances, and their institutions is potentially the greatest geopolitical triumph of the 21st century. So the classic play is that the Russians drive wedges between subsets of our populations. And what we saw during COVID, driving wedges between people and trying to convince some that vaccinations were bad and create strife, that is what we're going to see more and more of in the future. And is public health the primary goals, or it's simply to break up our populations? It's hard to say, but public health can still be a casualty.
Yeah, and we've seen that, right, over the last 3 years, without a doubt. We've seen individuals who, without any evidence whatsoever, have made specific and very incredulous claims without any data and without any evidence about what's going on in this area, in public health, certainly in medicine. And so that's really caused alarm with a lot of folks. And for anyone who hasn't read, Lee Bollinger, the president of Columbia University, he gave a tremendous commencement address at Columbia University this past May, and it talked about the importance of the First Amendment. He's a First Amendment scholar, and in the law school, and he talked about the infringements of the First Amendment and how the First Amendment has been stretched further in this country, forget about the rest of the world, as far as it's ever been stretched. And so the importance of understanding that, again, everyone today watching this program has at their core some sort of connection to the healthcare system, and they're generally digital health entrepreneurs, investors, buyers, and certainly government officials and academics. And so it's important that that we're all looking at how digital impacts that First Amendment, how First Amendment is being vocalized through digital platforms in healthcare. And that's a big part of digital health. Certainly, when digital health is defined as anything around the human being that affects their healthcare, and anything inside the human being, i.e. bioinformatics and genomics, that obviously impacts their healthcare. And Julie, from your perspective, and you've been deep in this now for a while, when you look at the some examples from what you've seen around the world, on democracy or the lack thereof and how that affects health outcomes.
Mhm.
What are some case studies that you can talk about that really highlight how important this is, and how important the mission that your fund is on is?
Yeah, well, there are a few studies out there that show correlation between per capita GDP, quality of democracy, and then the quality of universal health coverage. And the countries that do well are the same countries that our strategy tilts towards, no surprise. Canada, the Nordics, Australia, etc. I think Rick has an example from Brazil we wanted to share.
There were some reforms that happened to correct essentially ballot level mistakes where ballots were being discarded in Brazil. And they only improved the system in cities, I believe it was above 45,000 people. And so you had a really nice crisp boundary where you could do an A/B test. And they found that where they revised their electoral system and essentially stopped discarding the ballots of people with lower literacy rates, they got substantially better healthcare outcomes. Similarly, in Africa, in places where they have real elections, there's a term we use, which is a hybrid regime or competitive authoritarianism, which is like a quasi-democracy. They pretend to have elections, but they're not real. So we're talking about the places in Africa where there were real elections. And those were correlated with reduced infant mortality and, again, better healthcare outcomes. Speaking more broadly about free markets, the classic example is the Soviet Union, where because of price controls, they had chronic shortages, and they only really had one consumer product that was available in limitless quantities, which was vodka. And life expectancy in the Soviet Union was about 60 for men. So again, there are all these various correlated examples.
Really, really important things, and so important to highlight what you just said too. We have about a minute left. Julie, what would you like to leave our audience with before we sign off? And again, for everyone who's listening, please do connect with them on LinkedIn. Ainsley has posted and will post their LinkedIn connections to everybody and in the chat board here. But Julie, what would you like to, if there's one key message that you'd like to leave our audience with about digital health and human rights and what you're doing, what would that be?
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for all the great work they're doing, and thank you, Stan, for bringing this to the forefront. It's every year the trends seem worse and worse, and we're always looking for good news, and this consortium is good news for me. So thanks for putting this together.
Absolutely, and looking forward to having you on and join us at the HITLAB Summit. So for those of you who want to meet Julie, and I think Rick, are you joining us too on the 29th?
Not in person. I won't be able to. In person.
Okay, so we'll see you in the hybrid sessions then. Julie will be there, and looking forward to having everyone join there. But thank you both, and really wishing you the best on your fund and your good work.
Thank you, Stan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.